that's funny. Let's see here. Gathering of Ravens, I believe. There we are. All right, welcome to the Wagon Meister stream. Today, let me just check here the levels of the. Oh, the microphone is very, very low. There we go. Hello, 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 hello. Yeah, so here we go with this. Just raising the volume of it there a bit more. It's weird that it picked up so much. Hello? Okay, so let's do this. Let's adjust the microphone here. There we go. Okay, that's a bit better. All right, wonderful. Okay, edit this. All right, there we go. All right, very nice. All right. Oh, man, that's funny. Oh, man. I need to just put on like a chill podcast on YouTube while I read out this thing. Because I can't watch HBO Max while I'm doing this. That's a little silly. That's what this is for. All right. So my volume is fair. It's not glitching. It's not crazy. All right. Let's see here. All right. Do I have YouTube? Yeah, I do. Okay. Let's load that up, and we'll just look up random stuff while I'm reading. Okay. So, Wagon Meister stream, we're doing some reading, and then we will be transitioning into another video, probably just to simply, what's the word I want to use? Play some games, get some gaming on. All right, let's see. There we are. All right, let's figure this out. Nah. Some casual music for myself. Oh no. All right. There we go. Nice. All right. So here we go. The Gathering of Ravens, Chapter 7 onward. Let us begin. Chapter 7. From the cave, they headed south along the trail. It snaked to the right as it cut through the low hills, clinging at times to the steep side of the valley formed by the glittering fjords. The trail followed the tree line. On their left hand were the crests of the hills, an expanse of wind-swept heath which Attain could see the scorched and jagged footings and once formidable longhouse of an ancient and once formidable longhouse, stark against the dark, cold blue sky. Soon, just gotta do a little share in here. Nope. And everyone can see this, but that's okay. There we are. Soon, Their path took a deep plunge into wooded country where gold and brown leaves rattled in the wind. Here they left the trail which bore sharply right, and Grimnir led them overland, avoiding settlements and skirting fields left stubbled by the year's last harvest. At times, he maintained a punishing pace, driving her along almost at a jog. Other times, they prowled forward like spies infiltrating the camp of the enemy. At these intervals, Grimnir kept his nose low to the ground or snuffled the air. Once, around midday, she caught him having an animated conversation with a gnarled tree. Cursing it in a harsh tongue she took to be the native speech of the Skraelingar. "Your nail god has infected them," he said, spitting in disgust. "Infected who? The trees?" Grimnir fixed her with a hard-eyed stare. "The Landvitir, you little fool. Ye wretched hymn-singers. Ye spread your filth like a pox, raising these nithing bowls ye call crosses that only serve to bleed the land dry of its savour." Savor is sorcery, yes? Etain felt a measure of her old fire return. And sorcery is the domain of the devil. So, a land liberated by the grasp of sorcery, and from all the unclean things that thrive on it, like your land Vitir, is a land that is pleasing to God. For God abhorreth all these things, and for these abominations he will destroy them at thy coming. Oh boy. "Then your miserable god is a dolt who'd cut off his own nose to spite his face," Grimnir replied. He shoved her along. "Move! You're wasting precious time." Oh boy. Dark, dark, dark. With the waning of the day came shreds of clouds from the west. The chill had become more pronounced, even though the wind faded to a mere breeze. Etain was stumbling from exhaustion. When they emerged from the trees above a rocky shingle, a sheltered inlet that opened on the root of a fjord, a broad lake, whose surface gleamed like molten copper in the late afternoon sun. Great stands of fir and pine and red-leafed oak ran nearly to the water's edge. Down on the shingle, well above tide level, stood a small cluster of timber buildings. A village. 8 houses are arranged around a central hall. Twilight twinkled. Firelight twinkled, and smoke drifted up from the hearths. On the edge of the village, she saw 6 small fishing boats drawn up for the night. "Too far south," she heard Grimnir mutter. He crouched there for a long while, sitting on his haunches in a peculiar fashion, with his knees drawn up under his chin. He stared first at the village, then at the far shore, a purple haze on the western horizon. Etain could make no sense of Grimnir's intentions. If his plans were to sail from Sealand to England, which was madness this time of the year, they should be making for the west coast to find a ship to take them across the Kattegat to Jutland. From there, if they followed the same route that she and Njal had taken on their sojourn east, Grimnir would need to secure passage from the Reba on a ship bound for the Frankish coast, and from there cross the British Sea to the shores of East Anglia or Wessex. But, as near as Etain could tell, the paths he chose were those that led inland. Finally, as the first stars flickered to life among the thickening clouds overhead, Grimnir stirred. He caught her by the arm and dragged her close, his voice soft but full of menace. With his other hand, he tugged a length of plaited leather rope from his pack. "Listen close and listen good. We're going down to that stinking little shithole of a village, and we're taking a boat. That last one there. The one farthest from their wretched houses. We're going fast and we're going quiet, and if the sly ones with us, these fish fuckers, will be none the wiser till morning." Quickly, he looped the rope around her right wrist and tied it cruelly tight. She gasped, clawing at it. "What are you doing?" "Do I look like a fool? You're thinking, ha! Here's my chance to be rid of him. Here's my chance to slip away. Try it, and try to raise an alarm, and I'll promise thee this. I will not harm one hair on your miserable little head, but I will kill every last man, woman, and child I find down there. Make a sound, and I will gut them alive. Boil their bones for a stew, and make a cloak from their skins. Do you think I'm lying?" Etain shook her head, her eyes wide. Grimnir grunted. "Good. You're not as stupid as I thought. Stay close and watch where you step, because if you fall, I will drag you across that shingle. Do you understand? Remember what I said." Grimnir stood and shouldered his satchel. Etain followed suit, clutching her meager sack to her chest, and then they were off. Grimnir loped along like a wolf, low and fast. Etain struggled to keep up. The ground flashed by underfoot. Between them, the rope stretched taut, distending her wrist and twisting it near to breaking. She grabbed onto the rope with her hand to relieve the pressure and put her trust in God. By some miracle, she kept her legs under her. She was breathing hard by the time they had reached the rocky shingle and trying not to make a sound as she gulped air. Grimnir wasn't even winded. He stopped, crouching at the lee of a boulder. The boats were 20 yards distant. Etain wondered why he had paused. Why not make straight for the boats? But she dared not give voice to her question, for fear someone else might hear. How many children dwell within? Seconds later, she saw the reason why. A gray-bearded Dane was walking along the line of boats, patting each one as though they were his prized stallions. He wore a pale red tunic, heavy with embroidery around the neck and down the sleeves, and baggy trousers. A woolen cap warmed his balding pate. Grimnir's nostrils flared, lips peeling back from his teeth. He dropped the rope and loosened his seax at its scabbard. The Dane stopped at the last boat, a 9-foot-long skiff with oarlocks and a high prow. He stood there, hands thrust into his belt, his head tilted up as he studied the clouds filling the starlit bowl of heaven. His breath steamed in the frosty air. Then he turned slowly and began to retrace his steps. Etain didn't even hear Grimnir stir. She didn't miss his presence until she turned to raise a questioning eyebrow. Only then did she notice the long black shadow creeping across the shingle, soundless, the drawn seax glittering like a spike of starlight. Etain clapped a hand over her mouth. She dared not utter a word, but knowing what was to come, she commended the old Dane's soul to God. "Afi!" a child's voice cried. Suddenly there was a flurry of movement from the far end of the line of boats as a tow-headed boy dashed into view, waving a wooden sword. Grimnir froze. The boy skidded to a halt, and Etain tasted blood from where she had bitten her tongue. The old Dane held his arms out to his grandson. The boy, though, had gone as pale as a winding sheet. He dropped his sword, gave an ear-splitting scream, and ran crying back to the village. Bemused, the old Dane turned around to see what had spooked the boy so, and saw only the empty shingle behind him. Etain exhaled into her hand, silently thanking God, for Grimnir had ducked down alongside the boat, out of sight, though still prepared to strike. She saw the old Dane shake his head. He hurried after his grandson, lest the boy get the whole village in an uproar. Grimnir did not move until the old man reached the edge of the village. Then, with acrimony to spare, he gestured for Etain and put his shoulder to the boat's keel. Wood scraped stone as he shoved the boat into the calm waters of the inlet. Etain caught up his satchel and hustled over to where Grimnir waited. "Ymir, take that mouthy, you little rat," he was muttering to himself. "Should have gutted the both of 'em. Hurry up, get in. Other oars." Etain clambered over the side of the boat and immediately located a pair of oars. There was also a short mast and a rolled sail beneath the seats, where she stowed his pack. She nodded to Grimnir and almost fell across one of the seats as he gave the keel a tremendous heave and vaulted over the strakes. The boat pitched and bobbed. He took the middle seat, ran out the oars, and fell into a rhythm of long, smooth strokes that set the water hissing against their prow. In little time they were clear of the inlet and heading into the deeper water of the lake itself. From the village, Etain saw a line of torches wending their way toward the boats. The old Dane was in the lead, followed by a few other men and women from the village. He held his grandson, intent on showing him that there were no monsters lurking on the shingle. Grimnir saw it too. She heard him curse between oar strokes. "Will they follow?" she asked, though in her bones she knew they would. These boats were the lifeblood of the village, and they would sail to the edge of the world to repay the insult of its theft. But they had darkness on their side. The men of the village would be hard-pressed to track them across the water. Grimnir's silence only reinforced her belief. He bent to the oars, setting an even pace that would have exhausted a man, even such men as Njal and his kin. Etain shivered. Grimnir demanded nothing of her, so she sank down in the ribs and clawed at the rope around her wrist until she prized it off. Her shoulders trembled. She tugged a length of sailcloth from beneath the seat. The salt-stiff canvas became a makeshift blanket. She could hear the faint sounds of pursuit, the splash of angry oars and angry cries, but they were distant, dreamlike. The motion of the boat was hypnotic. Surge and rest, surge and rest. Grimnir sniffed the wind and made minor adjustments in their course, taking them on a southwesterly tack across the lake. As she lay in the bottom of that gently rocking boat, her mind drifted to poor Njal. She wondered if he had survived the day. She prayed for him, for his succor as well as for her own. "He will find me if it is the will of God," she said to herself. But in that quiet moment she wondered what had happened to her. What was her strength? Where was her famous resolve? Had she not told Njal just yesterday that God helps those who help themselves? And here she was acting like some shy and shrinking Andromeda, chained to a rock and praying her Perseus would arrive in time to save her from the beast. Vividly she saw herself, axe in hand, striking the Skraelinger's head from his shoulders and carrying that grisly trophy back to Njal. Etain smiled. "But you gave him your word," a small voice whispered in the back of your mind. "You swore to Christ you would go quietly." She could not deny that. Exhaustion snared her, and she yawned. Sleep tugged at the edges of her consciousness, and her body slowly surrendered to it despite her best efforts. In those final moments of awareness, she realized something. An oath made under duress to a heathen was no oath at all. God will forgive me. And the dreams that followed, dreams of her captor's headless corpse flopping at her feet, filled Etain with a sense of warmth that was far from Christ. Grimnir rode like some mechanical beast, forged of gristle and iron. Only dimly did he feel his limbs burning with exertion. Then, only if he allowed himself to feel anything at all. He had no time for weakness, no need for rest. He learned from his mother's brother Giffer what would happen if he had succumbed to some half-felt desire of the flesh. Fah! He loved that old bastard in his own way. But Giffer had been too quick to give in to weakness. Rest bred indolence, and from indolence came melancholy, and hard on its heels, the black sleep of death. That was the curse of his people. No poison could touch him. No disease could lay him low, but the weight of his long years could harrow him like a pox, if he but allowed it. Instead, Grimnir followed his father's example. Belagir, the one-eyed, only permitted himself to rest 1 day out of every 10, and then only grudgingly. He filled the hours and days. I'm going to move my webcam so y'all can see me again in crazy. There we are. Adjust that back for the computer top. There we go. See where it is camera-wise. Yeah, that looks good. All right. Hello, viewer. We are currently reading a story. Instead, Grimnir followed his father's example. Belagir, the one-eyed, only permitted himself to rest 1 day out of every 10. And then only grudgingly. He filled the hours and days between with scheming, plotting, and the red froth of slaughter. What was good for the sire was good enough for the son. As he rode, Grimnir turned his mind to the problem at hand. Those wretched fish fuckers were hard on his scent like a pack of dogs. Sharp-eyed beyond the ken of mortal men, he could see the froth beneath the keels of the 2 largest boats following them. A mile behind, he judged, and twice that distance from the smaller boats that spread like a net behind them. Grimnir counted 3 oarsmen and 1 more sitting on the tiller in both lead boats, all men who knew this lake like they knew their wives' thighs. Miserable bastards. Grimnir did not stop to wonder how they knew what direction he was headed. He doubted any of these ignorant wretches knew the truth of it either. They followed their gut, or so they told themselves. But Grimnir knew otherwise. He could hear it. With each dip of the oar, the phantom song of the Sjavatir sent ripples across the water, guiding those wretched Danes to him, as sure as if he'd stood up and waved a torch at them. These Sjavatir, these sea wights, had long memories, and they nursed a deep hatred for his people. Grimnir hawked and spat into the water. "Taste it," he muttered in the harsh speech of his people. "Taste it and know me as one of Belagir's blood. Send these fools to me, and I will salt your water with their blood." The song of the Sjavatir faltered a moment, and then renewed in intensity. Grimnir laughed. He slashed the water's breast with his oars. He was more than a match for any of these 3 of the white-skinned dolts who followed him. Nor were there any questions in his mind that he would reach the far shore first. Once there, he knew how to deal with these cross-kissing little maggots. Grimnir bared his teeth in a bestial snarl as he redoubled his efforts. Chapter 9. "Come find me, Njal, son of... wrong voice. Come find me, Red Njal, son of Hjalmar, slayer of Prince Aethred of Wareham, and the Scourge of Exeter. Come find me, if God wills it." The plea held Njal back from the swaying bridge to heaven. He could see the far green country of the afterlife, stretching out before him across the chasm of death, ice-covered mountains glowering in the distance. On the cold wind, he heard the voices of his kin, his axe brothers, calling out to him, bidding him take his place among them at the All-Father's table. He could hear them, but he could not follow. A mortal spark, weak as an ember, held him back. Come find me, Red Njal, son of Hallmar. Come find me. He knew that voice. It belonged to a woman, not his wife, for he had sworn to serve... who? A crucified god? Of that he was certain. Odin? It must be, for the Allfather once hung himself upon Yggdrasil for 9 days, so he might learn the secrets of the runes. He was Odin's man, and the voice, the woman who pleaded for his aid. Come find me. Attain, he moaned, remembering the slender red-haired girl he had taken from the ruins of Exeter. He felt his body, then heavy and leaden, like something hewn from the cold stone on which he lay. Muscles screamed as he moved them. His hands, his arms, his shoulders, his throat felt like a mass of bruises, and his face burned like fire. How? Skralinger. The word seared into his brain. Rage pushed aside the agony. Skralinger! Odin's doom was upon them, upon that whole miserable race, and still he had made a compact with one instead of cleaving its head to the teeth. He'd been a fool, and this was the thanks he had for it. Slowly, Njal rolled onto his side, and teeth clenched as he fought off a wave of nausea. The cloth fell from his face. One eye was swollen shut. He opened the other. Pale gray light filtered down from the fissure in the roof of the cave. By its faint illumination, he saw a scattering of clothes and personal items, sheets of vellum, and 2 overturned panniers. A bed of cold embers marked a spot of a fire. He got to his hands and knees, though every moment drove spikes of pain through his limbs. Nothing seemed broken. His head swam. Njal crawled to the steps, dragging the blanket with him, and pulled himself into a seated position. Shivering, he wrapped the woolen blanket around his shoulders. He couldn't recall what had brought him to this cave, or even where it was. He didn't remember why he might have had congress with a blasted Skralinger, or how he was allowed that miserable wretch, what was his name, Grimnir, to get the better of him. But he knew in his bones that Attain was his responsibility, his charge, and he had allowed that bastard to all but kill him and make off with her. Come find me. Njal sat a moment with his head in his hands. He was certain she was alive, since the Skralinger needed her for something, but what? Where was he bound? Where? Something clicked in Njal's bruised brain. He raised his head as a name floated from the soup of his memories. Bjarki Halfdane. England, he said. He's bound for England. Red Njal, son of Hjalmar, slayer of Prince Eothred of Wyrm, and the scourge of Exeter, snatched a long splinter of wood off the ground and rose to his feet. The blanket slipped from his shoulders. He knew the bones around his right eye were shattered. He knew he would likely never see right out of it for the rest of his days, and he knew he was Odin's sworn man. It would be a fitting sacrifice. All-Father, great Odin, look here. Grant me vengeance. I offer you my flesh. Odin! Gritting his teeth, Njal reached up and dug the splinter of wood right into his right eye. And the roar that echoed from that cave on the road to Roskilde was the roar of a wounded dragon. Chapter 10. It was a change in motion that drew Attain from sleep. A dim awareness that the gentle hypnotic rocking had ceased, and what had replaced it was the sensation of like a cork. Water slapped against the hull. She opened her eyes. She lay yet in the ribs of the boat, nestled against the forward thwart, her sailcloth blanket close and warm. It was near dawn. The air around her was still and glacial and smelled of snow. Etain raised her head, expecting to see dim outline of Grimnir's back, etched against the lightning sky. Instead, his seat was empty. She looked around and realized with a start that she was alone in the boat. She kicked free of the sailcloth and stood. The boat scraped against the shore, its painter tied fast to the branch of a tree that grew at an angle from the steep and rocky bank. She saw no sign of her captor on the bank, and a quick search revealed his gear was missing. I'm going to change the title here. Reading a Gathering of Ravens. There we are. Nice. Alright. Is this some malicious prank, or has he truly abandoned me? But Etain realized she didn't need an answer. It was the work of Providence. For whatever reason, Grimnir was gone, and she had no intention of waiting around to discover why. Snatching up the sack, holding what few things she had left to her, Etain jumped from the boat and clambered up the bank, loose stones splashing into the water or thumping against the hull. She would find a way back to Njal and thence to Roskilde, where she would resume her life as a young monk, none the wiser. But as Etain gained the crest of the bank, she heard the blare of a horn. The sound startled her. She whirled, and through the trees, coming hard up the shore, she caught sight of a Danish boat. "There!" one of the men on the prow bellowed, drawing an axe from his belt. 3 others were arrayed behind him. The last man on the tiller was a gray-bearded man clad in a pale red tunic heavy with embroidery, the old Dane from the village. "Find the bastard's trail and hunt him to ground," he said. Though innocent, Etain did not dare remain here and try her hand at reasoning with these men were out for blood, and the blood of a thief at that. She bolted like a hare. The sudden movement drew the old Dane's eye. His roaring voice stung speed from Etain's stiff limbs. "Christ's mercies! There! After him!" Etain fled through the trees, following the faint path of a game trail. She could hear the men behind her. The old man's voice lashed them on. She ran in the twilight before dawn, her monk's robes blaring behind her as she tried without success not to leave a trail that even a blind man could follow. The path widened into a weed-choked clearing where the charred remains of a steading stood among the brambles. Fallen leaves piled against its crumbling foundations, and from its blackened center post, standing tall like the mast of a sunken ship in shallow seas, hung forgotten reminders of those who once sheltered beneath it. Half-melted utensils, stag horns left to cure, and the dried bundles of wild garlic left untouched by the flame. Fat flakes of snow drifted from the leaden sky, lending the ruins the forlorn aspect of a life subverted by tragedy. A stitch burned at Etain's side. Her stride faltered. She could not outrun the Danes who pursued her. Her ignorance of the countryside made it less likely with each passing step that she might stumble over some hidden redoubt. But she was free, and she still had her wits about her. Perhaps where Etain had failed, a young and earnest brother Idun might have been counted upon to pick up the slack. Etain circled the ruin, calming herself and breathing deeply. The snow was coming down heavier now. It stuck to the brown wool of her cassock, cut no differently from the monastic habit of a Benedictine monk. She pulled up the hood, its peak casting her thin face in shadow, and folded her hands into the voluminous sleeves. She walked with a slow and measured pace, as though taking a turn around the grounds of her cloister. As she passed what must have been the entrance to the steading, she looked up. For an instant, morning sunlight pierced the clouds to illuminate the lintel and center post, creating the silhouette of a mighty crucifix. Etain stopped. Hope filled her breast. She crossed herself, knelt in the swirling snow, and prayed. That was how the Danes found her. They entered the glade from the game trail and fanned out. The old Dane, followed by 3 kinsmen in rough brown and yellow homespun, 2 with axes, and 1, the youngest, to judge by the wisp of his blond beard, carrying a bow with a broad-headed arrow nocked. They had expected the trail of the thief to continue on, or to find him cowering in some bolt hole. They did not expect to find a monk kneeling in the leaf mold. The younger Danes glanced questioningly at one another, and then looked to their elder. The gray beard drew a sword and laid it flat on his shoulder. He motioned for the others to stay back, and slowly approached the praying figure. "You there," he said. "I saw you running from my boat. Are you a God-cursed thief?" To her credit, Etaine's voice held the confidence of a man of God. A man whose Christian zeal wore his Christian zeal like a suit of finely wrought armor. She glanced up, blinking at the snow that brushed her face. "I am but a poor son of Christ, brother, lost in the wild and seeking the road to Roskilde." "And I say you're a lying thief," the old Dane replied. "I know what I saw, and I saw you running from the lake shore, running from the boat you stole from my village across the way. No one steals from me, not from Hrolf Asgrim's son." Etain nodded. "You did see me, Hrolf Asgrim's son, but I did not see your boat. Was it damaged?" "No." Wool rustled as Etain rose from the ground, smoothing out her cassock. Then, rather than seeking vengeance, good Hrolf, why not join me in offering a prayer of thanks to the Almighty for the safe return of your property?" "I don't believe him," one of the younger Danes muttered. "Looks too soft, even for a monk." "Be silent, Eagle." The elder chewed his lip. He was on the verge of speaking when an ear-splitting scream plunged the glade into chaos. The sound came from the youngest of the Danes, the youth with the bow. His kinsman swung around in time to see him drop his weapon and claw at a length of steel that blossomed from beneath his sternum like an obscene and gory flower. A torrent of blood belching from his gullets choked out a second scream as the steel slid out of sight. The youth's legs gave way, and rising behind him, Etain saw the sinister visage of the Skrelinger. "Grimnir, no!" Etain's cry hung in the snow-flecked air. Each second passed in an exquisite lethargy, a lifetime in a single staccato pulse of the human heart. The youth crumpled. Before his cheek touched the cold ground, Grimnir was a blur of motion. An axe flashed down. It never connected. Wood slapped flesh as Grimnir arrested the blow, catching the haft of the axe and holding the Dane's arm aloft. The man's eyes widened, shock warring with fear as he got his first good look at what had killed his kinsman. An instant later, Grimnir's say-axe ripped across the Dane's belly. A second blow went deep into the man's unprotected armpit. Grimnir stripped the axe from his victim's faltering grip. Hrolf Asgrim's son turned toward Etain. In the lines of his careworn face, she saw an echo of Njal, the same look of recognition, the same look of shock, and the same glimmer of deep, ancestral hatreds. His gray beard bristled his hard, and sinewy hands knotted in the fabric of her cassock. "What deviltry is this? What evil have you brought on my house?" Her eyes met his. She pleaded with him, not for her own life, but for his. "I beg of you, run." Over the old man's shoulder, Etain saw Grimnir fall upon the third Dane, the one called Egil. The man had mastered both shock and disbelief. He called upon the Almighty as he swept in, his axe aimed at Grimnir's skull. Axe haft met axe haft with a sharp clack of wood. It was an offhand parry, clumsy and unbalanced, but still the force of it caught Egil by surprise. And in that instant of hesitation, Grimnir's say-axe darted in snake-like and pierced Egil's throat. The Dane staggered and fell and died gobbling on his own blood. Snow swirled, flecking the faces of the dead. Grimnir's chest rose and fell. His breath steamed in the frigid morning air. He tossed the axe aside, his clawed head around the hilt of the say-axe. Grimnir glared sidelong at Hrolf Asgrim's son. She said, "Run, you wretched kneeler." Lips curled in a snarl of hate, Hrolf shoved Etain aside. He reached up and tugged a cross of hammered silver from beneath his tunic. Hrolf snapped the chain and slung the talisman at Etain's feet. "Keep your prayers, witch," he said, and slowly backed away from her. Hrolf and Grimnir circled the glades, two wolves squaring off, fighting for territory, for dominance. "I know what you are, Skralinger, and still you stand," Grimnir hissed. "You've got stones, old fool. The skein of my life is woven. Why run? So I can die with your steel in my back like a craven?" Hrolf hawked and spat. "For too long I have been blinded by the false promises of the White Christ. What use do I have for redemption? I want an end to make the Valkyriar weep. You will give it to me?" Etain saw grudging respect in Grimnir's feral red eyes. He stopped circling. "Call them." "Odin!" Hrolf Asgrim's son raised his sword aloft. "Look here, Allfather. Send out your high-hearted maidens and let them choose which of us will live to fight another day. I offer my life, if you want it." A gust of wind rattled the few leaves left on the trees, driving eddies of snow before it. Away in the north came a dull rumble of thunder, while in the east the heavens gleamed with golden light. "The Son of Man shall send his angels," Etain muttered at the sight of it, quoting the Gospel, "and they shall gather." Grimnir cocked his head as though hearing something beyond mortal reckoning. "They come," he said, teeth bared. "They come to collect their bounty." And suddenly the wolves surged forward together. Etain looked on, transfixed. She expected to see Hrolf's head bouncing over to land at her feet, but the old Dane matched Grimnir stroke for stroke. Sword rasped on Sayax, breath woofed, feet stamped. Whirl and parry, strike and lunge. It was like watching two dancers who were masters of their art. But Grimnir's iron endurance fixed the ending of the fight. The old Dane knew it too. He dredged deep and put every last ounce of his flagging strength into a sweeping blow that could have cleft the skull of an ox. Grimnir ducked it by a hair's breadth, and with a cry of triumph he buried his blade up to the hilt in the ribs of Hrolf Asgrim's son. Thunder reverberated. The light in the east vanished. The man coughed, a red froth staining his lips. He turned from Grimnir and took a handful of steps in the direction of his slain kinsman, his sword trailing him. He clutched at its hilt in a death grip. Hrolf raised his face to the glowering sky and laughed. Etain wanted to rush to the old man's side to ease his passing and beg his forgiveness, but Grimnir waved her away. She looked on as he caught Hrolf's swaying body and eased him to the ground. "I see them," Hrolf muttered, his beard clotted with gore. "The choosers of the slain. They drive the crossbearers before them. We will meet again, Skralinger." "Aye, Dean, we will trade blows again in the breaking of the world," Grimnir replied, and with a savage twist he drove the tip of his sayax into Hrolf Asgrim's son's heart and ripped it free. Grimnir rocked back on his haunches. He cleaned his blade in the fold of Hrolf's tunic and sheathed it as he stood. Etain bent to retrieve the cross the Dane had thrown away. She stared at it. Her eyes welled up. She thought of the young boy who ran out to meet his grandfather on the shingle last night. Were his father and his brothers here among the dead too? How many widows had this stolen boat made? How many orphans? Etain closed her eyes and prayed over the tiny silver cross, tears dripping from her lashes. They were going to leave in peace, she muttered. Her captor merely grunted. You murdered them without cause. She opened her eyes. Grimnir was crouched over the dead. Oh, he did not despoil Asgrim's son, but he gleefully rooted through the possessions of the others he had killed, coming across a pair of twisted gold and copper arm rings, a small pouch of hack silver, hewn from goblets or decorations and carried like coinage, and a new whetstone. Like you murdered poor Njal.
Murder? Grimnir laughed, pocketing his fines. Murder, is it? You filthy hymn singers are all alike. You call it murder when it doesn't suit your needs. When it does, it's the will of your maggot-riddled corpse god.
What need did the deaths of these men serve, then?
My need, foundling. I take what I want and I pay for it with this.
Grimnir slapped the hilt of his seax.
If any of your kind wants it back, what's theirs, they only need meet my price. This one,
he indicated the old Dane with a jerk of his head.
Knew it. That's why he came after you with steel instead of words. And you played your part well.
My part? Grimnir chuckled as he walked to the edge of the glade and retrieved his satchel, then came back to stand before Etain.
You didn't really think I just wandered off and let you alone, did I? Did you?
Her cheeks flushed. You used me as bait.
Aye, and you did just what I thought you would, once my back was turned. You took to your heels. So much for your oath to come quietly, eh? I scratched 2 itches there. These swine off my back can put your words to the test.
My word does not mean I plan to stand in place like a lamb that is being led to slaughter, said Etain. And to come quietly means I will neither plot to kill you in your sleep, nor sit and hatch incessant schemes of escape. I am here because it's God's will, and when his will changes, I will no longer be under your thumb, whether you like it or not. And if I am left to my own devices, I will go my own way.
Fair enough.
Grimnir stared at the grey sky. The snow had slacked off. Only a few flakes drifted down from the heavens.
We've wasted enough time. Let's go.
He prodded her, gesturing for her to move off ahead of him. But Etain shrugged him off and stood her ground. Go where? If you hold on to this insane hope of reaching Britain before winter sets in, that we must go west to the coast. There may yet be ships.
Oh, aye, ships full of Danes who are convinced my people are devils sent to lead them astray, Grimnir hissed. Maybe once I've been welcome among the Reavers, but no longer. What did your Christ Dane call me? The bane of his people. The truth is, his people were the bane of mine. You can't come of the earth like vermin. Well, I am the last of the Kaunar. The world has changed, foundling. Twilight has come from the elder folk. And soon will sound the horns of Ragnarok.
Before she could reply, Grimnir caught her by the arm and twisted her around and shoved her to the direction he wanted to travel. She stumbled forward, the silver cross still clutched in her fist. Etain risked a backward glance. Grimnir, too, was looking back at the glade, back at the blackened ruins and the sprawled corpses. 2 ravens had alighted upon the steading's tall center post. Huge black birds with glossy beaks and obsidian eyes that gleamed with malicious wisdom. Grimnir sketched a mocking bow to them.
Go back to your master,
she muttered, barely a sound enough for Etain to hear.
Go and tell him a son of Belaguer yet lives, his doom be damned.
And as if in answer, the 2 birds took wing, their deep echoing about the glade. Chapter 11. For 2 days, under skies hewn from the cold card of winter, Grimnir guided them south and west. They left the settled fjordlands near northern Sealand for the wilder country of the south, a land of moors and fens and tangled forests. They ate what food they had left, hard bread and salt pork and the last of her store of apples, and drank from the clear running streams. By night, the temperatures plunged and snow threatened. Grimnir begrudgingly, well, not begrudgingly, but just grudgingly, Grimnir grudgingly built a small fire. Atane would huddle near it for warmth, but the cold had little effect on the now taciturn Skralinger. He sat away from the fire, muttering to himself in the harsh tongue of his kind, or singing some tuneless chant that echoed with the drums, horns, and racks of war. He was awake when Atane dropped off to sleep, and awake when she crawled stiff-limbed from the beneath her blanket. She wondered if he had slept at all. For the most part, her first impressions were sound. Grimnir was as godless and profane as any heathen Northman. He sneered at her morning prayers and scoffed at her wish to pray at midday or over her food. He had no time for anything that smacked of Christ. Just the sight of even the small silver cross Hrolf Asgrim's son had cast aside filled Grimnir with sullen rage, but he made an effort to pause at every moss-covered runestone, poring over each surface like a priest over the gospel. What he found there dictated not only the direction they traveled, but his mood. Stones commemorating those who had fallen in battle left him nigh upon jubilant, while the few they happened across trumpeting some nameless Dane's conversion sent him into a curse-laden tirade.
"Traitors and oath-breakers," he would mutter. "May the wolf gnaw on their wretched livers."
By the afternoon of the third day, as a keening wind whistled down from the north, they descended into a shallow valley thick with some of the most ancient forest Atane had ever seen. The trees were squat and gnarled like giants in repose, their spreading boughs half clad in the finery of autumn. Walking beneath them felt as though she were walking down the nave of a mammoth cathedral. It was silent, and gray light, tinged with red and gold, filtered down from the clerestory of branches overhead. With each step, Atane felt she came more and more under some fell scrutiny, like something beyond the ken of mortal man was watching her descend into its world, a slice of the pre-Christian past, a twilight world of branch and leaf, something that would judge whether or not to let her live. She glanced at Grimnir as if he felt the same sensation. He did not show it. Perhaps he knew what lurked among the trees. That thought caused her to clutch all the more tightly at the tiny silver cross.
"There,"
Grimnir said. After another hour had passed. The shadows had grown deep and long, and Atane could only just make out what lay ahead of them. The forest, hemmed in a lake, its surface as black as the starless night. At the center of this lake was an island that looked overgrown with trees. Hawthorn, birch, oak, ash, and yew grew in such profusion that their trunks twisted and writhed together in a mass as solid as a fortress palisade. Christ almighty, what is this place? Even as she spoke the words, Atane felt the hair on the back of her neck stand at end. She turned suddenly, staring into the deepening gloom. The tree around her exuded menace, something hoary and wild and fey that begrudged every breath she took.
"No place where you go, Nilgard is welcome," Grimnir said. "So watch your tongue, little fool."
Atane nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Grimnir led them to the water's edge, to where someone had drawn a slender punt up onto the shore. Atane looked dubiously at the flat top-bottomed boat. It seemed as though the forest, its boards black and shiny with use and decay. A pole lay next to it.
"Get in,"
Grimnir said. "We shouldn't be here," Atane replied. backing away from the water. This place is wrong. It's evil. I can feel it.
Oh, evil, eh? What do you know about evil? Get in the boat. We're close now.
Ooh. Atane shook her head, her trembling hands clasped before her. Something inimical, something inimical to her lived among these trees, something unnatural whose hatred and malevolence warped the bosom of the earth. That island.
Get in the gods be damned boat, little fool!
Roared Grimnir. The echo of his voice profaned the silence. Boughs rustled on a phantom wind. Atane imagined she could hear spectral laughter, as though whatever dwelled here took great pleasure in her terror. She backpedaled. She was on the verge of fleeing from this cursed grove when Grimnir sprang. Atane screamed. She's had the impression of lips skinning back from yellowed fangs and eyes blazing like coals in an instant before his fist hammered into the side of her jaw and sent her sprawling into oblivion. Chapter 12. Atane woke by a fire, a great roaring blaze that filled the glade with warmth and light. She lay with her back against a fallen log, her hands bound behind her. A dull ache radiated from her bruised jaw. Her ears rang. Yet she blinked, looked around, and tried to remember how she'd gotten here, wherever here was. What she'd taken for a glade was actually a bight in the living palisade of trees that girt the small island. A grassy cove dominated by a stone-curbed fire pit. It was fully dark now, but Atane could still see the black lake beyond, its black surface gleaming like a sheet of dark ice. It was snowing. Fat flakes hissed and died in the crackling flames rising from the pit. She twisted to see what was behind her. Red-orange lights sent shadows writhing along the tree walls, the boughs overhead laced together like a roof. Its autumnal thatch sparse now with the onset of winter. At the deepest part of the bight, an ash tree and a mighty yew stood with their branches and the upper reaches of their trunks woven together. The bases of these two trees did not touch. Indeed, enough spaces existed between them that they formed an opening into the living palisade, an ominous black gate into the heart of the island. She saw Grimnir a few paces behind her, staring at this dark aperture. "Why are my hands tied?" she muttered. Her words slurred from the swelling in her jaw. The silver cross that had belonged to Hrolf Asgrim's son was gone. No doubt he had sent it to the bottom of the Black Lake. Grimnir did not move. His chest expanded as he took a deep snuffling breath and held it before exhaling. When he finally turned toward her, his frown etched his craggy brow.
"The taint of your kind reaches even here,"
he said. He moved to where she sat. "Loose me," she said. With a grunt, Grimnir leaned forward and checked the knots that bound her band in place.
"You stay like that for now."
Why?"
"For your own good."
Grimnir walked around to the other side of the fire and sat at a seat sawn from the trunk of a fallen oak. His eyes gleamed in the light, feverish and bright. Atane shifted around, trying to find a more comfortable way of sitting. While not tight, the leather cords kept her arms at an uncomfortable angle. Was this punishment? His way of chastising her for trying to run away? Where do the Gains gather in England, eh? Atane looked up. The question had caught her off guard. She shook her head. "Well, it's been a year and more since I've been there," she replied. "But some used to make camp on the Isle of Wight, just off the coast of Wessex."
Oh, that's where he'll be, the miserable bastard. That maggot Halfdane. He'll hide out among his mother's people and try to convince them he's a gold giver and a war leader. Ha! Wretched oathbreaker, that's what he is.
Grimnir stood and paced like a caged wolf.
He's another who plays his part well. A few years back, he had that idiot King Haakon of the Norse convinced he was a powerful Gorthy. The fool wouldn't move an inch against the rebel sons of Eirik Bulletaxe, who schemed to boot him off the throne until his pest priest had cast the runes. Well, I got wind of it and tracked the lot of 'em up country to a wretched pistol called Rastarclove.
Grimnir spat into the fire.
Haakon was a crafty one, knew the rebels were coming. He played a ruse to convince Bloodaxe's sons they were outnumbered. Fools fell for it. They took to their heels, and Haakon's dogs raped a bloody harvest among them. I left them to it, circled round, and came at Haakon's camp from the north. That's where I found him, Halfdane, crouched over the runes like he knew what he was about.
Grimnir laughed at the memory.
Wasn't expecting me, the swine! My coming was spelled right there in the runes, and still he was blind to it. Well, he had enough sand in his belly to trade a few blows, but when it came ill for him, they took off like a March hare. I had nearly had him, but we ran full into Haakon and his guard.
Grimnir stopped pacing. His eyes grew stern and deadly as he glared at something beyond the firelight behind Atane.
This time, he won't have a score of Norse rogues to hide behind.
Rastarclove? Atane said after a moment. Her brows knitted. That was more than a few years ago. Njaal's grandfather sire fought alongside Haakon the Good. But if you fought the Halfdane there, and he also sailed with Njaal and Olaf Trygg, his son, then wouldn't Bjarki Halfdane be an old man by now? Suddenly Atane heard a trio of voices in her back, harsh and rasping voices, like three different sizes of stone grinding together in a mockery of speech.
Use your wits, Nithinger.
He is only half a Dane. Whence came his father's blood, eh? She stiffened at the same feeling of unnatural hatred. Of cold menace returned. It crept up her spine, threatening to freeze the heart in her breast. Eyes wide with terror, Atane turned. Three gaunt figures emerged from the opening in the living palisade of trees. They were naked, save for twists of filthy hide knotted around their loins. Their skin were as pale as curdled milk, and their hair and beards black, stringy and matted. They stood as tall as Grimnir, though their limbs were heavier and gnarled with age. The eyes staring out from their seamed faces beneath bushy brows were dead and black, as lifeless as the eyes of a shark. They stared at Atane with an insatiable hunger. Grimnir moved around the fire.
Nori, not Nali,
he growled.
My wretched cousins.
The three figures stopped. The largest of them, Nori, stood only a handful of paces from Grimnir. The other two, Not and the crook-backed runt, Nolly, crouched at their brother's shadow. In their brother's shadow.
Why have you come here, son of Baelger?
Said Nori. We have no truck with the one you seek. Not pointed a dirty, accusing finger at Grimnir. When has one of Baelger's brood ever come before the sons of Nain and not asked a boon, eh, brother? He has brought tribute. Nolly dared to dart in close and sniffed the air above where Atane was sitting. A gift, brothers. One of his. A woman of the White Christ. Grimnir slapped Nolly away.
Back, maggot!
Nolly squeaked and sought refuge in the shadow of his brothers. The counter wants something, they whispered and hissed to each other. What do you want, son of Baelger? Does he want gold? What is gold to us, eh? A sword, then, a blade forged in dragonfire by the hands of the mightiest smiths of the Verger. Are we not the sons of Nain, cousin? What does he want, eh? What does he want?
I want to walk the branches of Yggdrasil, Grimnir said, like my father did of old. I want to take the Ash Road.
The Dvergar, dwarves, for such is what Etain heard them call themselves, seemed taken aback by Grimnir's request. They huddled together, whispering. Finally Not stepped forth. "And where would you go, cousin? Not to Asgard, for you are the last of your kind to yet face the doom of Odin. Would you seek the Jarls and gold givers among Angerthbother's kin and Jotunheimer, or would you wander the mists of Niflheimer, never to plague Mythgarther again?"
Fach! I'm no fool enough to tempt the foes of fate, the Norns by Reeve and Mythgarther.
Grimnir replied.
Yggdrasil's branches pierce this world and countless places. Work your sorcery, cousins, and open a path that leads across the sea to England, to the shores of a place called Wessex.
Once again, the Dvergar babbled among themselves. Etain's eyes flickered from the three Horbard brothers to Grimnir and back. Again. Yggdrasil, Norns, Asgardr. These were stories and fables made up by the heathens to explain the world around them. Myths that could not stand before the truth of Christ the Redeemer. To hear them talk so freely of it, as if they truly existed, filled Etain with a curious sense of dread. Finally, the strongest of the brothers, Nori, silenced the other two. "It is not as it was in the olden days, cousin. The power of the White Christ rises like an unwanted weed in the garden. It chokes the life from the old ways and threatens the very roots of Yggdrasil. We would ask this thing. We can do this thing you ask. But the outcome is not as certain as it was in your sire's day. And there is a price. A blood price." Nori leered at Etain and licked his lips. Grimnir's eyes narrowed.
"You sell yourselves cheap, beardling. There's not enough meat on her bones for one of you, much less 3. And why would I pay 3 to do the work of Odin?"
Like a conjurer, Grimnir produced a pair of old dice carved from bone.
"You maggots throw from it for it. The winner opens the way and gets the prize. Share it or not, that's your business."
Avarice brought a gleam of life to the three brothers' eyes. They glanced sidelong at one another. Nori chuckled. "We will take your offer, cousin." Etain struggled against her bonds. "You bastard! I thought you needed my help." Grimnir ignored her. He tossed the dice at the feet of the Vergar. Like dogs fighting over a scrap of meat, they went at once in an effort to lay hands on the dice. Amid the shouting, punching, kicking, and cursing, Grimnir leaned down and grabbed Etain by the hair, dragging her close.
"Watch and be silent,"
he hissed. Suddenly, Nori emerged from the scrum with the dice held high. Crowing like he had won a great victory, he chivied his brothers into some semblance of order and quickly sketched out their game. The winner would be whichever one scored the best in 3 out of 5 throws, with a derisive chuckle that even Etain couldn't barely hear. Grimnir seated himself on a log and watched the 3 of them go at it. The 3 throws took over an hour, with Nori and Not squabbling over even the tiniest nuance, from acceptable stances for throwing to what the phrase "out of bounds" truly meant. Crookback Nolly accepted their every pronouncement in stoic silence and rolled highest each time he touched the dice. Clearly he was in the lead until Nori declared his last 2 throws invalid because he couldn't stand up straight. On the 4th throw, Not jiggled Nolly's elbow, causing one of the dice to fly off towards the edge of the lake. The elder brothers went bounding after it, capering like bearded children. "It plays where it lays, you worms!" Nori shouted, demoralized, cheated of his victory. Nolly shuffled after them. But as the crooked Dverger passed by where Grimnir sat, the latter snagged his arm and drew him close. Atane saw a flash of iron as something passed between the two. Grimnir gave the runt a knowing wink. Nolly blinked. He glanced sidelong from Grimnir to his deceitful brothers and tried without success to hide a gap-toothed smile. Finally, the dice flew for the fifth and final time. Twisted little Nolly was the clear winner, but it was Nori who stepped forward. Not ever the sycophant, cleaved to his brother's shadow, muttering endearments and licking his cracked lips at the thought of being permitted a taste of flesh, a drop of blood. Sullen Nolly stood behind them, his face suffused with black rage. "I'll take that prize now, cousin," Nori said, a gloating smile twisting his features. He started toward Atane, and with a strangled cry Nolly struck. The crook-backed runt shouldered not aside. The knife Grimnir gave him flashed in the firelight as he planted it hilt deep into his elder brother's neck. Nori stumbled, but his scream of agony turned to a wet gurgle by the rush of black foul-smelling blood. Atane saw disbelief written on the Dverger's face. He took a step towards them, and then dropped, like a stiffened board, as dead as Judas. For an instant, no one moved. Save for the crackling of logs on the fire, the cove was absolutely silent and still. Suddenly, a peal of tittering laughter ripped from Nolly's breast. The runt capered and danced, but as he whirled in place, crowing and crooning, it was Knott's turn to strike. Snarling like an animal, the middle brother came up off the ground and wrapped his long fingers around Nolly's throat. The runt's crowing turned to screeching as Knott's bore him down. They thrashed and struggled, rolling and twisting and tearing, and Grimnir and Atane looked on. Knott's clawed fingers tore ribbons of skin from the flesh of Nolly's throat. For his part, the crook-backed runt tried to gouge his brother's eyes out.
"Look at the high and mighty sons of Nain now,"
Grimnir said. Nolly's bulging eyes implored him for help as Knott throttled him atop the blood-battered corpse of Nori.
"Driven to murder by dice and the promise of flesh,"
Grimnir spat. He rose off the log and crossed to the struggling Dvergar. Before either of them could react, he grabbed a handful of Knott's hair, wrenched him back, near to breaking, and in one swift motion drew his seax and ripped it across the dwarf's throat. A fountain of black blood jetted from the jagged wound. It drenched Nolly, who coughed and wheezed as he dragged himself free of his dying brother's grasp. Even still, the Dverger wanted his prize. He rolled onto his belly and scuttled toward the Atane, hunger and lust, filling his black eyes with an unholy light. His brother's stinking lifeblood dripped down his face. Nolly licked the gore from his lips. Faster he came, like some obscene crab. Atane recoiled, tried to get her. Atane recoiled, tried to get her feet under her. She shrank from the thought of Nolly's foul touch. Inches from her, Grimnir caught him. He planted a foot in the Dverger's twisted back, slamming the runt into the ground and driving out what little air he had left in his lungs with an explosive woof.
"Your life is mine, beardling,"
Grimnir said.
"Open the way."
Nolly struggled to draw breath. Will you honor your bargain?"
"There is no bargain. Your life is mine. Open the way or I'll carve maggot holes into your belly, you miserable runt."
Reaching down, Grimnir knotted his fingers at Nolly's hair and dolled them upward. He gestured to Atane. On unsteady legs, she clambered to her feet.
"Turn around,"
he said, and with one stroke of his seax, Grimnir severed her bonds. Trusting she would follow, Grimnir dragged Nolly toward the opening of the palisade of trees. Atane watched them for a moment, and then she caught up Grimnir's pack and hurried after him. You had no intention of bartering me to them, then?"
"Why would I?"
Grimnir paused, giving her a chance to catch up. Nolly writhed in his grip.
"You need to open your eyes, little fool. 3 to 1. Now the odds are more to my liking.
He shook the crook-backed Dverger like a sack.
Isn't that right, cousin?
You lied! Nolly screeched. Ima, blast your eyes!
I never said what your prize would be, did I, Beardling?
Oh, they assumed, said Etain.
Aye, the fools assumed.
Grimnir turned Nolly loose and shoved him toward the opening of the trees. The twisted dwarf walked slowly ahead of Grimnir, scowling in his beard and fingering his bruised throat. He passed through the wood-wrought doorway. Hello, new viewer. I hope you're doing well. We're reading A Gathering of Ravens. It's quite a good book. It's a grim, dark fantasy novel. Let's continue. The woven walls of trunks towered above Etain's head. It was impossibly ancient, a fortress of gnarled trees and interlaced branches. Slender birches coiled around the boles of mammoth yew trees, while oaks that were young when Christ was a boy erupted in a profusion of tangled shoots and branches that wove in and out of the hawthorn and the beech. Along the edges, like guards tasked with keeping a crowd at bay, stood countless ash trees, from tender saplings to hoary old gray barks that must have seen the dawn of the world. Etain hesitated in the threshold of the gate, shivering at the thought of what might lie beyond. Was it truly Yggdrasil, the mythical world tree? Or was it some bit of heathen mummery that flourished in the shadows, where the word of God did not yet reach?
Go on.
His hand thrust her across the threshold. She gasped, but despite the cold knot of apprehension in her belly, Etain marveled at the sublime beauty that existed inside the tree garth. It was a cathedral of sorts, a heathen shrine made from living wood. Dwarf-wrought lamps like fantastic beasts hammered from copper and bronze cast pools of silver or gold or red light. They illuminated an intricate pattern on the floor, a labyrinth of knotted roots that made their footing treacherous. At the heart of the garth grew a primeval ash tree. Yggdrasil, she heard Grimnir mutter. Etain coughed. The air here was heavy with the scent of ancient vegetation, of moist earth and leaf mold. From far above she could hear the rustle of the wind, the flutter of wings, and the faint chittering of a squirrel. They followed Nolly. The Dverger approached the tree with a sense of reverence, like a priest attending his god. Grimnir's wolfish face bore an almost childlike look of wonder, though his eyes never lost their cold and calculating gleam. Ever did he look like a merchant who marveled at his gold even as he appraised its worth. Etain herself stepped carefully toward that naughty and twisted Goliath, with a deep sense of foreboding. Before the ash tree, and cradled in its roots, stood a stone basin filled with glowing embers. The great tree's trunk was hollow with age, and set inside it was an arch doorway made from rough-hewn stones, each one carved with a serpentine trail of runes. Beneath the doorway was darkness so utter and complete that Etain wondered if it was not some trick of the light. Harder to explain, though, was the bone-chilling breeze that wafted from the doorway. Then something happened that Etain did not expect. The sullen Dverger passed his hands over the basin of embers. Suddenly, blue-tinged flames leapt up and curled around his fingers. Etain recoiled in terror. This was no mere hedge witchery, but an ancient sorcery as old as stone and bow. It was the devil's bailiwick, and simply witnessing it meant she strayed perilously close to damnation. Out of reflex, she crossed herself. Nolly reacted as though she had struck him. The sorcerer's flames wavered. "Aye, curse you, Nithinger! Your white Christ has no place here! Lop off her hands and rip her tongue, cousin, lest she bring the wrath of the Aesir down upon our heads." Nolly trembled and clutched at his temples. Grimnir seized her by the scruff of the neck.
Leave off, you blasted hymn singer, he growled, and none of your miserable hair crosses either.
Etain did not reply, though a small voice in the back of her mind wondered what would happen if she flourished a crucifix and sang out the Lord's Prayer. After a moment, Nolly regained his composure. He shook himself as though clearing his mind of a foul memory. The flames sprang full to life. The crook-backed verger stared deep into the heart of a basin, and in the harsh, croaking voice, he began to chant. Etain could not understand the words. They were guttural and repetitive, but a rhythm of Nolly's voice gave the blasphemous suggestion of a heartbeat, as though he tried by savage words to awaken something long dormant. The chill breeze gusted, causing the eerie blue flames to dance and waver. Something deep inside the earth shivered, running through root and bowl and causing the branches overhead to rustle and shake. Nolly's voice dropped to a low growl. Yggdrasil shivers, the ash as it stands, the old tree groans, and the giant slips free. The Dvergr nodded to Grimnir. Still holding Etain by the scruff, he pulled her with him to stand before the stone-bordered doorway, covered now in a rime of frost. The blackness beyond writhed and roiled like a living thing. Sounds came forth, and distant and phantasmal. The clash of steel, the roar of voices, music, harsh laughter, the cries of the dying, the din of the 9 worlds echoing through the roots of Yggdrasil. Etain clasped her fists together, biting her knuckles to keep from calling out to the Almighty for succor. Beside her, Etain felt Grimnir stiffen. Nolly had fallen silent, and the sudden ends of his chanting raised the Skraelinger's hackles. Grimnir turned. Suddenly both of them staggered forward as the Dvergr rammed Grimnir in the small of the back. Long-fingered hands tried to strip Etain from his grasp. She had a brief glimpse of Nolly's eyes, no longer dead, black, but alive with lust and vengeance. Etain screamed with a bitter oath. Grimnir twisted his body, wrapping her in his protective embrace. With his free hand, he snatched a handful of Nolly's beard, dragging the crook-backed Dvergr off balance. The echo of their struggle ended abruptly as all three tumbled through the doorway, vanishing into the heart of Yggdrasil. 13. Ooh. Interesting. We still have 2 more chapters. Kind of wanted to end it here, but you know what? I think I will continue on until we finish. Yeah, you know what? I'll stop it here. I think this is a good point to stop. It's been about an hour and 23 minutes. So that's pretty fair. Yeah, so there's a reading stream for you. I hope anyone who's listening enjoys it. Any future people who watch this either on Twitch or YouTube enjoys this. It's a good book. I recommend buying it for yourself to support the author. Yeah, so A Gathering of Ravens by, I believe it's Scott Odin, a part of the Grimnir series. And we will start our next reading session with Chapter 13, and then we will continue on to Book 2, which, if you don't know where that takes place in, it takes place in southern England, in the area of Essex. So, I bid everyone a wonderful night. Stay warm in your homes. The night is long and full of terrors, as the Night's Watch say, but in all reality, it's a good time to explore and learn of the world anew. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, follow if you're on Twitch, and check out my social medias. I mostly post on my Instagram, but even then, it's not as much as it used to be because I'm not traveling much because of the pandemic, but hey, there you go. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their evening.